We have two presentations today on our legislative overview and advocacy report. Mr. City Manager, if you want to begin with the 2021 state legislative overview.
Yes, good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Tonight we do have both of our state legislative lobbyists here to provide an update on the end of session report. I don't know if they cast lots on who's going first or not this evening, so I will defer to them and let them have run of show here. So I will turn it over to our esteemed lobbyists.
Okay, thank you very much. Who's first? John Barget and Chris Ropey.
Good evening, and thank you for having us this evening. I'm John Barget. I've met most of you, but this is Chris Ropey that's with me, and so we're two of the members of our firm that represent and have the privilege of working on behalf of the City of Independence in Jefferson City. Thank you for that opportunity. We appreciate it. Chris is going to go dive down a little bit more into some of the issues that he's been working on at great length with the mayor, Zach, Mr. Mayfield, and others. And of course, we work very closely with our colleagues, who you'll hear from in a minute, Ms. King and Mr. Robbins. All of the issues of independence are important to all of us, and we try to coordinate and make sure that we're doing the right things on your behalf and following the right direction. And even though we have different entities we represent, things do overlap when it's for the City of Independence. So this legislative session, just as kind of a broad overview, was an extremely interesting one for a whole lot of reasons. I've had a lot of years of working with legislators, elected officials, as well as our colleagues have, and as well as with you. Unlike any of you other state legislators, I've never had the courage to put my name on the ballot. I always just like talking to people that do it. But I commend you for what you do, as I do the legislative friends that provide us the time and to listen to what we have to say. We had 60 new House members, and I think 11 or 12 new senators. That's a pretty big sea change in the Missouri legislature. And so what it does involve is a whole lot of time-consuming, patient education of people as to what issues are. I often tell people that, you know, when you take some of the groups that we represent, a physical therapist, everybody in the legislature is looking at us like, well, is that a gym teacher? So it really does take a moment or two to explain to them, no, they're a very highly educated individual that works with surgeons. And much like you all, people are saying, like, what type of issues could the City of Independence have? So it does take some time and effort. We're very, very fortunate to have Senator John Rizzo representing the City of Independence. John is not only a fantastic individual, a great public servant, but he is probably one of the kindest and brightest individuals that we have in Missouri, in the Missouri legislature. He always has the time for us, for Mr. Mayfield, when the mayor's there, to sit and talk about what are the possibilities, what are the probabilities, and it's always a great delight to work with him. Some of the big picture items that we dealt with this session, you know, I've done this for over 40 years, and I don't think I ever really stood up in front of a group as I am tonight telling you the state of Missouri has so much money they don't know what to do with it. But that truly is the case. The situation that's arisen over the last couple of weeks that you're all politically astute and read the papers, it is called the legislature back into Jefferson City, hopefully will be resolved by Wednesday at noon, and the governor can go about releasing those funds with when he releases the budget for the first of the fiscal year, July 1st. But aside from that, there's literally more money than they know what to do with, and that's becoming a bit of a problem. I think you all probably have some of the same issues, maybe not more than you need, but some of the same issues at the local level.
We do have some suggestions for where they can bring it back.
Yes.
And the mayor and Zach have provided us with many suggestions to take to Jefferson City, which we're working on. But overall, I think the session is one that some of the major issues were resolved. However, I would not be telling you the truth if I didn't say that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, when you get majorities as big as they currently have in Jefferson City, all the kids in the sandbox don't play well together, even when they're the same political party. And that's certainly happening to the majority party right now, and we saw that this year. I do believe that with regards to the American Rescue Plan, to the best of my knowledge, Tommy or Tracy or Chris may know better, but to my knowledge, there has not been a decision made as to when the governors will have a special session, or if he even needs to release those types of funds. I know there are groups working on how they would like to have them spent, analysis of those agencies and how the funds would be used for further consideration, and finally a decision. It could end up being that they wait till January and do it at that point, but most speculation was that they may have a special session in the fall. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about some of the details, and I'm certainly make myself available for questions with Chris.
Thanks, John, and we'd be here all night if we got onto every single issue that affects local governments and municipalities such as yours, but I do want to touch base on a few of the more relevant ones that we probably spent the most in the majority of our time working on your behalf. And the team over there is going to talk more than I will about Wayfair and what that did with the cable franchise and sort of the package that got put together on that. But like John said, they did check the boxes on some big priorities they've been working on for a while. And while it did seem pretty dysfunctional at times, as John alluded to, it shockingly they did get some things done at the end of the day to sort of write home about it, and they'll talk about that one. I know a big one, extremely important to you all, was on how local health ordinances and the legislature trying to stop you from making decisions that are best served for your community. A lot of that was targeted at St. Louis County and County Executive Page and what that would look like, and that went through a process up and down the entire legislative session where the major fight that took place was in the Missouri Senate. You had a deal in place at one point that the more conservative members of that chamber were not interested in, and eventually probably got a worse deal, which allowed you to keep more of your rights and what you would want to do with your local government, that ended up passing. And what that kind of looked like is, under a state of emergency by the governor over a 180-day period, it takes a simple majority to expand any sort of local rules or ordinances, or how you will decide that. What's best for you locally is a simple majority to extend some sort of period of needing to close down whatever it might be to keep your community safe. Outside of a state of emergency by the governor, that you might have some sort of local issue that you need to deal with, you can shut things down, as we'll call it, for up to 21 days during a 180-day time period. And in order to extend that, you will need 2/3 of, in your case, the council's vote to then keep that going, or to extend it longer, or whatever that might look like. So that's how that issue eventually got resolved, and what all parties were willing to let through the legislative process. That passed in an omnibus local government bill, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I get down my list here. And that can be terminated at any time by a simple majority of your council. If you do have something in place and there's whatever issue's going on where it needs to be terminated for some reason, the legislature put in there that you can do that with a simple majority. The next issue is the gas tax. Once it's fully implemented, it'll be a 12.5-cent increase in 5 years from now, which is about $500 million of expected new revenue to the state with this new gas tax. It will not have to go to a vote of the people. They wrote it in a creative way where you can apply for a refund for those additional taxes that you pay in a gas tax, and get that back if you want to go through that effort with the state of Missouri. But generally, in other states that have done that, they found that people don't do that, so the state gets to keep that money. 15% of those funds will go to local governments, so that's what your share potentially will be, and how that gets divided up from MoDOT when that is collected. There is a referendum out there being pushed to undo that, where it would go to a vote of the people. That is being pushed by an organization called Americans for Prosperity. I don't believe that they are too serious about that. I don't think they have the funding to do what it takes to go collect signatures and go through that process, and are likely using it as a fundraising tool for their organization. But it has been filed and it is out there, and it could happen, and we'll see how that plays out for sure. But that's kind of the state of where that is at. Another issue that I know a lot of municipalities were watching closely is the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which gets into the chief of police in O'Fallon, Missouri has resigned over it because of telling the state of Missouri where there will be $50,000 penalty for each time that there is an instance where local law enforcement or state law enforcement doesn't wants to enforce something that we have in federal law that might conflict, and it's a situation where I think it's a lot to be said where it could be unconstitutional. The Biden Department of Justice has already sent a message to Missouri saying, you know, you can't do this. Federal law is going to trump local law or state law, and how that will all play out. It'll play out in court. I'm assuming, end up at the Supreme Court at some point, and I'll let attorneys decide how they think that's going to play out. But that issue's not done as far as what happens with appeals and going to the Supreme Court, likely at some point. There were a lot of police reforms that were passed this year in the legislature. A couple of them that I want to mention that I think you're probably chief of police, and for your officers and for folks that are in your position ought to know about. There is a prohibition on decreasing your budget for public safety over a 5-year aggregate, that it can't be less than, I think it was either 12.5 or 15% less than overall budget cuts. So you do have some leeway, but the legislature did kind of tell you what you can or can't do with your public safety budgets, was put into state law if the governor does sign those pieces of legislation. They created a new public officer fund that will be funded with general revenue from the state, that will go to what, you have your PTSD situations where officers would need some additional help, and that fund was created to help with some of those mental health issues, if you will, that you see in the public safety world from time to time. There is some, what I would call officers' rights in when there is a disciplinary action, where they would have access to new information that they weren't prior to this legislation passing, and how they deal with that when they are involved in an incident. There is now if police hold a proposed criminal or somebody that has been charged for more than 15 days, that person now, you cannot charge for them to get access to their police report. So that is now free for somebody that is in a situation where they're held for more than 15 days. There is a ban on chokeholds with law enforcement now. So law enforcement in Missouri, unless it's in self-defense, and I can't remember exactly how it's written, that is in place as a part of some of these police reforms that took place this year. Finally, Missouri passed the prescription drug monitoring program. I think we were the last one in the state. Many counties, including yours here, were already on a county program, but there were still counties out there that were not utilizing this, and we now finally have this in place in the state of Missouri. The governor did sign that bill, so that is now in law. Then the last one to mention again is House Bill 271, which was an omnibus local government bill that had the public health ordinance legislation inside of it, as well as, I think, 20 other amendments got added to it. I think 28 amendments got added, but the bill that made it across the finish line was probably about 20 different provisions that were in that legislation. And a few that I want you all to be aware of and that we sent in our end of session report is the original bill, which is a local government expenditure database, which we had worked on for several years. There were some really bad versions of it in the past that we worked with the sponsors and others to make it more of a voluntary basis, and I believe working with Mr. Mayfield and your city manager, you're doing all these things probably right now anyway, so I don't think it'll be anything too detrimental to what you're doing. It had the public health orders in it. It had several changes to public right-of-ways and some utility measures that I'm sure they will touch on when they get up here. It prohibits vaccine passports for taxpayer-funded use, so public transportation and other things like that, you will be prohibited from having essentially vaccine passports as they're being called, dealing with people coming out of COVID. And then a final piece, as council members, that you will care about is the candidate filing period has been changed. So it now is a 3-week period from when you sign up to run for office and then when filing closes, which is 1 week less than you had before, and they moved that 3-week period sooner, so it's further out from the election. And I think the premise behind that is to give voters a longer period to know who their choice of candidates are. But that was a part of that local omnibus local government bill as well. A few issues that didn't pass that are going to be back that you will care about, and one that we've been working on for a few years now is failure to appear. The Attorney General continues to fight us on that through the legislature, and you saw a coalition of some urban some urban legislators who felt like this targeted their communities that stood up and blocked it, as well as some more of your conservative members of the legislature that continue to buy into this that it's taxation by citation. We've talked to people about the public safety element time and time again. Senator Searpool and Senator Razor from Senator Rizzo from this area, very supportive and supported the legislation and have done everything that they could to help us get that done. We came up short because of those coalitions fighting us. Property taxes, real and personal, are on the chopping block. Legislators and specifically several senators are trying to do anything and everything to reduce those, to eliminate those, and those pay for essential services that your constituents all care about, and there's not a funding source to replace any of those that is being offered at this point, just an effort to reduce government, and you will see that back. Home-based business regulation and not allowing you to regulate them, that is fought very hard every year on both sides, and we are thankfully able to be successful and stop that this year. You don't want neighborhoods turning into commercial zones and not your ability to deal with parking and just all the headaches that come with taking away your ability to regulate those types of businesses would be bad for your community and communities across the state of Missouri. And then the final thing, municipal election dates. There is a big push by the General Assembly to move municipal elections from April to November and get more people turned out to vote in those elections, as well as school boards and many other local offices that folks run from, as well as all of those taxing issues that we typically see in April, that they want to move those to November as well, to have more voter turnout and more input from the public on what the results of those elections will be. There's a whole host of reasons why that is a bad idea, and that was stopped this year as well, but it will definitely be back next year and continue to be back until that gets resolved in some form or fashion. That is all I have, and I don't know if you want to ask us questions now, or we can wait till the end and let these folks go next. It's whatever you prefer.
Go ahead.
I had a comment. I do appreciate the stuff you send out every day to my emails. I mean, it's very informative. I know what's going on with the state, and I do appreciate that from all of our lobbyists. I mean, it's a fantastic job. I mean, I look forward to reading it every day. I actually do. So I do appreciate that. That's all I have on that.
Thank you, and we're glad that you read it, and it changes from day to day, and it's like drinking from a fire hose, but we try to let you know what's going on the best that we can.
Madam Mayor, I just
go
have
ahead.
a question. I am so confused. The special session the governor called, is one of the topics the funding of Medicaid expansion or not?
So, two separate issues, and it's not Medicaid expansion funding, but it is Medicaid funding that is in the current budget. There is a tax on hospitals, nursing homes,
Right.
other healthcare providers.
That failed to pass.
That they did not pass this year. They failed to extend it, and so that put about, we'll just say, $2 billion of funding in jeopardy that we draw down from the federal government that goes to pay for our state's most vulnerable citizens. And so the Senate on Saturday morning got that bill done to extend it for 3 years. There got to be a big fight about who's pro-life, who's not, are we protecting the unborn in what we're doing with our Medicaid providers, but they did get that done. It now is in the House of Representatives, and we believe they will get that completed and on the governor's desk by the middle of this week.
But the actual funding of the expansion that people voted on, that is not a topic.
So correct, the legislature completely different. The legislature specifically did not fund Medicaid expansion. That was heard at the trial court level last week. The locally elected circuit judge ruled against the folks trying to pass expansion because it was a constitutional matter. It's able to go directly to the Supreme Court, which I believe the hearing has been set for July 13th or 14th. So the Supreme Court's going to make their decision, and I believe they'll say that Medicaid has to be funded, and by funding Medicaid in general, you have to cover this new population that the Constitution says you have to cover.
And so assume the court says that. Do we get another special session, or do we just not have funding?
So
How's that gonna work?
This is where the budgetary process, especially with Medicaid, gets complicated. So the legislature funded Medicaid. And so the Department of Social Services will take that money and they will cover the population they are supposed to cover and what I believe the court will say they have to cover. That money will run out,
Right.
but it runs out every year in Medicaid. We never know exactly how much to budget, so then the governor will propose a supplemental budget in the middle of the fiscal year and say, hey, I need $1 billion more, or I need $500 million because of issue X, Y, or Z. And so the legislature will deal with that. Whether it happens in special or during the regular session, they can do it during the regular session. It depends how long the money lasts for what they did appropriate this year.
Thank you so much
bet.
for explaining all that. Appreciate it.
Very complicated, so.
Hang on, I have a follow-up to that. So you mentioned surplus. Do we have the money then to pay for the expansion? Is that cash in the
So
coffers?
as John mentioned, there's
Okay.
plenty of money. The program, because of the incentives that the Biden administration put in place back in February, it pays for itself for the first 5 years. And then I think a lot of people would argue the economic development aspect of what that brings into the state, the new jobs, healthcare jobs that would create, that it will kind of pay for itself because the feds do a 90-10 match. So we only put up 10%. But the Biden administration has increased that for the next 2 years, where they'll pay for 95%. So our share is even less for those first 2 years. And then going forward, it still would be at that 90-10 match from that point. And there are all the money that is sitting around that the federal government has sent our way can be used towards that, and a lot of that is supposed to be used towards that.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Yeah, that's good to know.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
So let's go from Medicare to
Medicaid, yep,
sorry,
yep.
to SAPA.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm confused. We had basically votes down the party line, right? I mean, every Democrat lined up against it, every Republican lined up for it. What is the federal government saying that's an issue here? Do you know?
I'm sorry, I'm confused about your question, pardon me.
I'm confused when he said that it'll probably be challenged by the Biden administration for SAPA, the Second Amendment
Oh,
protection.
pardon me, you're talking about SAPA.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I thought you were asking about Medicaid. Okay.
No, I said let's
Oh,
jump from that
oh.
to SAPA. So
John, would you just come up to, so the
So-
folks at home can hear
So
you?
And you're
confused.
asking what will the challenge be against it?
yes,
So it is contended that you are putting people at risk, citizens at risk, by telling police that they cannot enforce federal gun laws. I don't purport to be an attorney. I'm
Right.
not an attorney. I don't
No, I
purport to know the
understand.
answers
I
to all these questions. But I can tell you that is one of the basics that they will contest, that it is the job of the local law enforcement to provide protection to the citizens through enforcing both state and federal laws, and that this denies them the ability to do that. That's what the opponents those that are challenging it will say.
are there other states that are being challenged
Yes, sir,
along
it is.
similar lines?
There's 3 other states that I'm aware of, just from reading, that this is currently being challenged in.
And I only ask because I got a neighbor who follows this quite closely, and he yells over the fence, and would like more information on that. Why, the government signs it, governor signed it into law this week, and then it's being challenged. So I'm just trying to clarify if you can give us information what they're struggling with, what is the challenge? And
I will be happy to get you some of the documents that I've had
I
and
would
provide
like
them to you.
that.
I will also tell you, the gentleman who is extremely knowledgeable about it and is not an attorney, but who had this research done is Senator Rizzo. Please
Really?
feel free to call John. He
Okay.
can tell you exactly. There was points at which he knew this part is a problem, this part has been tested in other states and found unconstitutional. This part of SAPA, they may say is okay.
Yeah.
But he was extremely astute about the information as
Yeah.
he weighed out what he was going to do.
No, anytime we see that division between party lines in this state, is always curious to me, so I just thought I'd ask that. So, the other question I have is on the broadband issue. Mr. City Manager, it says that 12% of residents in urban areas lack access. What's the percentage in independents?
I don't have that number at my ready, sorry.
Can you get that for me, please?
I'd be happy to.
I appreciate that. So it keeps coming forward, and I would like to understand this better. If private entities don't want to do it, and there's no money in it here, then why do we keep pushing for it and wanting to propose spending on it when it doesn't make sense in the private world? So that's my question. I know it's not to you so much, but it is to our city manager. Thank you.
And there's a House interim committee
Yeah.
that is looking at that issue. I think we've sent some information on, and they've scheduled their next meeting, that they're trying to help figure that out, to create a plan.
Can you send me some
Yeah,
more
absolutely.
information on that? I
Yep.
would appreciate that.
Yep, we'll let you know exactly what happens at the next hearing and future hearings, and I'll go back and pull the one, because they've had one hearing so far.
Thank you.
And send that report to you
Yeah,
as well,
anything
so
you
got
can
it.
send me for reading is great.
Perfect, happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, appreciate everything you all do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for John or Chris? Okay, next
Thank you.
up, thank you, is Tom Robbins and Tracy King.
Good evening. Thank you. It's great to be back and seeing people live. Thanks for having us. This past year, Mayor Weir does what she always does. She gave us a very clear charge. And this time it was a very specific and a very difficult one. But I'm happy to report that we not just met the charge, but we exceeded it. The idea was that the cable franchise fee, as I've told you the past few times, it was coming. Like, we could see it coming. Originally, the cable companies wanted to completely gut it. Our charge was to blunt the effects if it was coming, and then find revenue enhancements to offset the reduction that would be coming. There is very little more difficult in Jeff City than finding a revenue enhancement. That's a group of folks that can't find a tax cut they don't love. And so we nonetheless were able to identify a few outstanding issues that my colleague Tracy King, who really led the charge and is Missouri's preeminent tax scholar, frankly, she made it happen under the leadership of Mayor Weir, Zach, and John, wherever John is. Thank you. It was an incredible experience. Tracy will walk you through the numbers, but we believe that you're going to come out about $750,000 ahead, and certainly not behind. So she'll walk you through that. I wanted to answer a couple questions about special session. I don't have any more of a crystal ball than Mr. Barget, but it is my understanding that the governor is reluctant to call special sessions. He made an exception on the FRA because of the amount of money involved in the time-sensitive nature of it. But the governor's general position is you have supermajorities in both chambers, pass the stuff you need to pass between January and May. And so please don't take that as there won't be any future special sessions. I know that there's a lot of groundswell for that from both chambers, but just know that the governor is somewhat disinclined, minus a showing that this is an important issue that can't wait, and most importantly, that there's a deal in hand. So I think those are his calculations on that front. Tracy, come on up here. I just can't. Tracy joined us in the fall and really kind of led the charge on this. She's been working on Wayfair for
20 years.
a couple decades.
I'll explain that,
So here, it won't take 20 years to explain, but I did want to give her the opportunity to really walk you through all the great work that she did.
So, Tracy King, very nice.
Tracy,
Yes.
go slow,
Okay.
because this is really complicated.
Okay.
And I really want people to understand how this all came together.
Well, first of all, I want to talk really quick about how we got here with the internet taxation issue and why we are where we're at. So back in 1992, there was a decision by the Supreme Court. It was called the Quill versus North Carolina decision, or North Dakota decision, that basically stated that you cannot collect taxes from businesses who don't have a nexus in the state, because the internet was just unfolding. Internet retail businesses were just coming, and they just said it's just too complicated with 50 different states who have 50 different definitions and tax laws. It was too complicated until you come up with something a little more uniform and easy. You cannot collect taxes on internet taxes without a physical location or a nexus in the state. So that's where we started. I remember working on this back when Representative Joan Bray was the Ways and Means Chairman, and Tim Van Zant from this side of the state was the Vice Chair in the House, and now he works for St. Luke's. And so it's been a long time coming. And so this legislation's been filed every year. It was passed during the Nixon administration, but he found some concerns with some of the language. Anytime you put a comma in a tax law or the and in the wrong place, it actually changes the entire meaning of that tax policy. So that's probably the real reason the streamlined sales tax agreement never passed. But what happened in 2018 is that the Supreme Court came back and they declared in the Wayfair versus South Dakota case is that South Dakota had lined up their tax laws in a specific way that made it easy for online retailers to collect without a physical location. And so they allowed that for the state of South Carolina. Now, in saying that, from 2018 on, every state in the nation, including Missouri, started going down the route of how do we get our taxes in line similar to South Dakota so we can start collecting the tax. So Missouri did start that back in 2019, and ultimately I think it's a bipartisan effort between the House and Senate, a Republican and Democrat. Almost all of the legislators wanted to see Wayfair pass because it is a disadvantage to our brick and mortar businesses because they have to collect the tax, and these online retailers without a physical nexus in the state don't. And so that puts them at a competitive disadvantage. In fact, Senator Koenig said this is the most egregious tax benefit we've given. We've given Missourians the ability, we've actually encouraged them to buy from businesses out of state versus in state. And so everybody wants to fix it, but why didn't it get fixed the first year? Well, the battle has been, what do we do with the additional money the state gets? And there's a lot of folks who see this, a lot of legislators who see this, that we've never collected tax on internet purchases, so this is a new tax, so therefore it should be offset. So the fight over the last 2 or 3 years has been, what do we do with the money? Half of the Republican Party wanted to give it back as some sort of an offset to maybe like income tax reductions. There's another half of the General Assembly that just wanted it to go into general revenue. So that's been the difficulty for the past 3 years, and hung up on where does it go. So what happened this year? Why were we able to pass it this year? Well, first of all, I think some stars aligned, but you also had the Cable Association that came in, and they decided that they're not competitive because they have to pay franchise tax fees on gross receipts to cities and counties where other video services don't. And so they came in 2019, very late in session, said that they wanted to start talking about a compromise, brought all the telecommunications municipalities into a room and said, we want to do this, and then just got a lot of pushback, so it died. They came back in 2020 full force, and like Tom had said, there's not a Republican there that doesn't like a tax cut, right? So it was sold as this is a tax cut to the citizens because it's pushed off to the citizens. And so they were moving down the road fairly well, and they met up with the Missouri Municipal League, and they cut a deal in 2020, late in 2020, and their deal was that they would reduce the cable franchise fees. The Municipal League would stand down as long as it was attached to the Wayfair, right? So you have the cable reduction, the Wayfair, and then Municipal League wanted a kind of a committee, a state legislative committee that looks at taxing all video services the same. So that would include like over-the-top services, which is all your streamings, your Netflix, those types of things, as well as internet services. So that was the deal that brokered. It didn't happen in 2020, but it came out strong in 2021. And then we sat down with the mayor and John Mayfield. We looked at independence, and ultimately we found out independence is a loser in this deal. Now, many other cities might be a winner, but independence is a loser, and they're a loser in that deal because they had already passed, you passed Prop P, and you had already passed, and I will tell you the General Assembly looks at independence and how they pass Prop P as a model for other municipalities. Because in Prop P, you said we're gonna continue to fund the police and the animal shelter at the current level, and all the new money coming in would go directly to that, so it'd be an addition. A lot of municipalities play a shell game where the money goes in and they take the money they were budgeting and they move it to other services. But what that meant for the city of Independence is they had no way to make up the additional revenue. If you would have eliminated the cable franchise fees, it was to the approximately $1.4 million. Ultimately, we worked with them to get that to be half, so from 5% down over 5 years at a 0.5% reduction to 2.5%. Also, they changed in the definition of gross receipts, what that includes. And they took out everything like you pay for your top box, that was always considered part of the gross receipts. All these additional things other than cable services was removed out of that. But that definition happened day one of the passage of legislation. The Wayfair and the other parts happened multiple years down the road. So the city of Independence would have been losing revenue eventually, or immediately, and without any additional increases. Because you went ahead and passed Prop P, you are already collecting probably the majority of internet sales tax. Amazon voluntarily pays it. Now, most of, like any big box retailer that's here in the state, so like if you order something online from Target, you pay the sales tax. So who's not paying the sales tax are the folks. So Amazon is what they call a marketplace facilitator. They own the platform. They sell their products on the platform, but they also sell third-party products on their platform. They can't force the third-party folks using their platform to make that sale. They can't force them to collect the tax. So even Amazon is at a tax competitive disadvantage to the own people who are using it. So when Wayfair passes, what that means is you'll get additional revenue, but because you're already collecting the use tax, it's not going to be as significant as it would be to other municipalities. So for example, if cutting that by half was $700,000, the amount that you would bring in from Wayfair would be significantly less than that. And so it was a net loss to Independence. And so in working with the mayor and John, we sat down and we thought, well, what can we do? We need, as we say, some sort of additional, we either need to oppose this or we need to find something that supplements that, and that was the gas tax. So we were able to, like Tom said, thread the needle, work to get the gas tax and kind of the Wayfair / cable franchise fee to go together. And we were ready to kill them both if we had to. Like, we had to have both pieces actually pass in order for Independence to come out net positive in this deal. So, for example, if you would have got the cable franchise tax cut from just 50%, from 5% to 2.5%, the city would have lost approximately $700,000 a year. If you would have added Wayfair to that, then the city would have lost, I think, approximately per year, approximately $250,000 to where you're actually up over a 5-year period. It would have been $1.5 million. The loss over a five-year period for just cable franchise tax was $3.8 million. But with the impact of the gas tax, along with Wayfair and the cable franchise fee reduction, the city is actually in a net positive over the next 5 years of $786,000 that we predict, based on the numbers I think that the city employees were able to help pull that together. So that in effect is, where we were at. It was either going to be a big win or we were going to be neutral because we were going to have to do what we had to do to just, keep Independence from having the loss that they were going to have. So we were very proud of that. And so anyway, I just wanted to see if you guys had any questions before I hit on anything else.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I do.
Okay.
I have to ask this question anytime anybody talks about it because I'm fascinated by the obtuseness of it. What do these guys say, or gals, when you point out it's a gigantic competitive disadvantage? What do they say to that? I mean, literally, smallest towns in Missouri, the main streets are dead, internet's killed retail, and this is the worst thing that's ever happened. So what's the argument against that, or do they just ignore that point?
I would say everyone would agree with you. I've not had anybody who said we shouldn't do Wayfair. The fight and the battle was with the additional revenue coming in, the millions of dollars, does the legislature just let that go into general revenue? Or a lot of legislators thought that anytime you bring in something new, you should offset that. I mean, that was kind of the decision of Hancock. Now, this didn't trigger Hancock, but that was just their stance. And so the question is how do you refund the money? They looked at sales tax. It's a little more complicated. Income tax cuts correlated with the, they had to figure out the amount they were going to bring in and then figure out what that percentage was. It was pretty small, but to them, it didn't matter. But there's not one person who would argue that this had a competitive disadvantage.
It was just strictly a philosophical position or ideological
Yeah,
Right, it was
I mean,
always about the money.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
always about
No, I get that, but-
balancing that out. And there was some very.
I don't see what the crime is in having a new source of revenue.
Nor do we, but.
Right. But, Councilman,
Yeah.
to answer your question, I think that often it falls on ideology versus anything else. And so it's like, which jersey am I wearing? And that's the position I take. So I think that even if deep down they believe you, they're like, I took a pledge not to raise taxes. And that's, they operate off kind of bumper sticker politics.
Yeah, and you can argue both ways. Is this a tax increase or is this not a tax increase? I mean, we're always supposed to collect taxes on it, right? So you can say this is not a tax increase. It's just court just said you couldn't collect it, but you always should have been paying it, right? And then others will say, well, we've never collected tax on it before, so it is, we never got revenues in here before on this, so it is a new tax increase. So you could argue it both ways, honestly, and it, like Tom said, it just comes down to their ideology and what they believe. And we had to fight a lot of battles on this because the House had a version, the Senate had a version. The Senate's version is they wanted to cap all sales tax rates. So we were looking at that. The House version wanted to make everybody take a vote, even if you had passed it before. Can you imagine going back to the voters and saying, well, we passed Prop P, but in order for us to collect the rest of it, we're going to have to ask you to vote for it again, which is going to cost you, what, $200,000 for each election? Yeah, so we were able to get those stripped from the bill and move forward without either of those pieces in there. And that took a lot. We didn't know because both House and Senate sponsors were so dug in on the way. I mean, the House sponsor, Jay Oggleston, and he's a great guy and he's a policy wonk. But he wanted to offset the local amount somehow. Like he wanted to say, if you guys brought in X amount, then you should have to refund that back to your taxpayers. It basically was too cumbersome to look at it from a local political piece. And so we were able to negotiate all of that through so that we took out all of those really, really bad things that we knew that the city couldn't live with.
I have a
And-
question.
Yeah.
Is there like a floor, like if I'm a small business person in North Dakota and I sell $20,000 of goods to Missourians, do I pay that tax?
So that was the one thing that South Dakota had in that the Supreme Court liked, is that there was a exemption for small businesses. So that exemption was $200,000, I believe.
Okay.
So I think if your total sales are $200,000 or less, then you're exempt from having to collect the tax. Now, another thing Missouri did is they have these, what they call CSPs, service providers, I forget what the C is, consumer service providers. And anyway, they will go in and they will collect the tax for you. They will figure out the rates. They'll collect the tax for the businesses, and then they get to keep a percentage of that. But it waives the business's liability if the returns are incorrect that the CSP providers. So it's kind of a win for the businesses there. And you can do it through private corporations, which are already in the business and are doing it in multiple states, or the department can decide that they want to do it. I would suggest that they go to the private sector because they're already doing it. And by the way, Missouri was the last state to adopt Wayfair. Last year it was Missouri and Florida. Florida ended up passing it, so this year Missouri will be the last state to adopt it. And Chris just mentioned, I haven't seen it because I've been on the road today, but apparently the governor is going to sign Wayfair on Wednesday. So,
Very good.
so hopefully with the gas tax too. He loved the gas tax, so I will guarantee you he will sign the gas tax.
Councilman Steinmeier, can I answer do my best to answer your SAPA question from earlier?
Sure.
So,
Tommy, would you just mind
Oh,
coming
I'm
to
sorry.
the
So
microphone so they can hear you at home?
I am a
Yeah.
lawyer. I run a mean ticket, traffic ticket practice. So I don't claim to be a constitutional lawyer or anything like that. But my understanding is the general principle that the Biden administration is relying on is that of federal supremacy. And that, as you know, like a state statute can't trump that's directly in contradicts a federal statute. It's just not the way our system of jurisprudence works. Whenever we go to the legislature and tell them about those little nuances, they don't really care. So that's, the conversation was had, they understood, and their response tends to be, well, that's what the building across the street is for. So,
Which is
the Supreme Court.
I know where that
Yeah.
building is. I tend to think that, as a veteran, that, Bill of Rights doesn't have an expiration, and Second Amendment is worth protecting,
Yep,
and people in this community believe the same.
yep.
And I commend the governor for making the stand. I'm disappointed with the way it's split, but that's just me. And, I think the 10th Amendment means something still in this country, at least I hope so. And so we'll see how it plays out.
Certainly. As a lobbyist, I don't have political opinions, so I can't pass on that, but except to agree with you.
I think all of us do. I understand your position, and
I just wanted to, I think I just wanted to explain that I believe that's the
No,
principle
it's-
that Biden's relying on.
And I do, and I appreciate that. And again, elections matter, and so my neighbor, like I said, across the fence is talking to me. It's a hot button issue for him, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's not for me. I'd like to see how it plays out. So sometimes I think our federal government bullies us a little too much here in the little states, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And I'm not a lobbyist, so I can give,
That's
I
right.
can
Well,
give
you're
you my
elected,
opinion.
so you
tonight.
can-
Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah,
that, though. And
absolutely.
anything you can send me, I
Okay.
appreciate it.
All right.
The feds bully the state, and then the state bullies the municipalities. That's how
right.
that always
It does.
works.
It runs downhill, I'm telling you what. The state is, they're always talking in Jeff City about how much they hate Washington DC, but they seem to not trust the communities that surround Jeff City. So, that's our job in Jeff City, is to protect your autonomy.
And some of our communities struggle with the things that happen in Jeff City, too.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Okay.
Sure,
Other
like
questions?
when Jeff City decides not to follow the will of the voters.
Yeah.
But you don't need to comment.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just had to toss it in.
I
That's
just,
it.
I agree with all of you.
Which part are they not following?
Okay, are there other questions or comments for either Tom and Tracy or John and Chris? Okay. It's always fascinating. I mean, it really is remarkable to hear you again, Tracy, kind of talk about how this all came together, because it's hard enough to hold up one piece of legislation during a session, but to hold up three and make them all happen. I mean, I haven't been at it 40 years, Mr. Barget, but I've never seen anything like this. We've certainly never achieved something that had so much consequence, and it certainly took a lot of work on your part, on the part of our staff, to provide you with all that information. So that was really incredible. And John and Chris just hit on so many things that they worked on for us this year, and I know you worked on many more things for us as well, preventing, bad things from happening to our utilities. This was a very unique year, how our two firms had to kind of come together on these crossover issues and so many other things. So we're very, very grateful. We came out ahead, I think, on many counts. It's always good when you feel like we prevented bad things from happening, and some of these things, like the local health ordinance that Chris talked about, could have been far worse than what it ended up being, and many other things. So we live to fight another day, right? So thank you so much.
Mayor, if I can
Yes.
add, broadband development was brought up. There is an interim committee, as Chris said, July 20th. There will be a hearing that you can watch remotely online in Jefferson City. But I believe the next hearing will be July the 26th, and we worked with the chairman and Representative Rogers, and they're going to host that at the Independence Power and Light meeting room on July the 26th, so it'll be here in your hometown.
Thank you. Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, next is our federal advocacy report. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Madam Mayor, delegation from Independence recently traveled to Washington, D.C. to lobby on behalf of some of our federal legislative issues, and so Mr. Mayfield coordinated that and is going to give a quick summary of that effort.
That's quite a bit to follow, but I'll do my best in about 3 to 5 minutes. Tonight I'm here to report to the council about our advocacy efforts in Washington, D.C. When you meet with a congressman or a senator, you really get a limited amount of time, so we tried to focus our discussions on a couple of items that are very important to us, and those were infrastructure and tourism. You know, tourism's kind of been the talk du jour in Washington, D.C. over the last few months, and right after we left, there was an outline of a deal struck, so we feel like we may have played a small part in that. But it was a good time to get our request in front of our congressional delegation, and we shared with them requests totaling approximately $75 million. We talked about needing money, so that's kind of what we were going for. The major infrastructure project we talked about with our congressional delegation was widening Missouri 7 Highway, about 5.8 miles worth between 24 Highway and Pink Hill Road. I don't know if you've ever been out around Lake City around shift change, around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when you've got school buses going, you've got people coming and going from Lake City, not to mention the regular traffic in through there. It is quite the sight to behold. So it's a public safety issue. I know it's something that's important to the Fort Osage and Blue Springs school districts. It's important to us. It's a big project. It's $40 million. When we saw Senator Blunt, we said, well, the first thing on our item is, and he said, let me guess, Missouri 7 Highway. So we talked about Missouri 7 Highway quite a bit. Other requests we talked about were Independence Square streetscapes, Truman Connected, the third phase of the 24 Highway complete streets and safety improvements. 24 Highway is one of the more dangerous stretches of land between 24 and 291 and Sterling in the greater Kansas City area, according to MoDOT. So that's why there's been such an emphasis on 24 Highway, not to mention the Truman Library, which I'll get to that in just a second. They were very attentive. They didn't make any necessary commitments. The infrastructure bill that they have an outline on has not been written yet. It has not been scored by the Congressional Budget Office. It's a $973 billion bill over 5 years, or $1.2 trillion over 8. And again, they've just kind of agreed to a spending outline. They haven't really agreed to the meat and potatoes of it. So, and there may also be other opportunities and other bills for us to get these infrastructure projects in. For example, Senator Blunt is working on a rural bridge bill with Senator Toomey of Pennsylvania and Senator Casey, I believe. And so there may be opportunities to get some of these projects into those bills. We also talked about the Truman Visitor Center. You may remember in 2019, Congress passed legislation for the National Park Service to accept some property from us that's adjacent to the current Truman Visitor Center. You may remember a couple years ago, community shareholders and the city and the National Park Service kind of got together and kind of felt there was a need for a new visitor center and wanted to have it on the Independence Square, that it stay there and look for the right space. And then COVID came along, and as you all know, that has upended all of our lives and has delayed a lot of government projects. So we wanted to make sure that everybody was still on the same page, because we feel like this is a really important facility and tourism piece for our city. We have a vision for this facility, a 10,000 square foot facility with 3,000 square feet for exhibits, an enhanced movie theater, you know, programming that would be free and inclusive for family and children, because let's face it, I've been there, and I know some of you have been too. When you take your family on vacation, especially kids, I mean, you're trying to stretch that dollar. You're looking for all the family-free things you can find. So that's part of our vision, along with ADA parking, ADA accessibility, and adequate parking for RVs. I mean, you can just imagine the fun of parking an RV at the current location. So the reason why we're focusing on the exhibit space, there's not really in the current facility a lot of space for exhibits. And earlier this month, Mayor Weir's already smiling from remembering this, but earlier this month, Mayor Weir, Morris Heidi, our interim director of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism, and I had the wonderful opportunity to visit a storage site. They don't want me to disclose where it is, because when I tell you, you'll probably understand why. But we got to see personal items that Truman's had, that the National Park Service is just holding on to in storage, that they would love to have an expanded exhibit center to show some of these exhibits. And some of them might be things they might only show for weeks or months at a time because of summer, winter, et cetera. Some of them may not withstand being out in the heat for real long. But here are some of the items, just a few. I'm not going to name them all. The first one's one that made the mayor and I ooh and ah a little bit. It was Truman's Battery D Army ring. It was one of the first things they got out and showed it to us. That was pretty exciting. They have the first 2 Medicare cards issued by the federal government that President Johnson gave to Truman's in 1965 when he came here to sign the Medicare Act. They have the suit that Harry Truman wore the day that he married Bess Truman, and coincidentally, today is the 102nd anniversary of their wedding. They also have a tie that President Truman wore at his 1949 presidential inauguration. They also have appliances, dishes, clothing, toys that Truman's bought for the grandchildren to play with, and my personal favorite, a Kansas City Athletics baseball jacket worn by Harry Truman. And that's just the tip of the iceberg that they have in storage. They would love to share. So if they had a bigger exhibit area at this new facility, if you went in April, for example, and then you went back in August or September, you may see totally different exhibits, making it a very unique experience. You're not going to see the same old. In their exhibit center and with the movie theater, you're going to see new things. So that's really a way to get people to come. And when you couple that with a $30 million facelift for the Truman Library, I mean, these are 2 major tourism pieces for the city of Independence. Talking with the Truman Library last week, they say that they expect a 25% increase in attendance over 2019 numbers. What that means in hard numbers for us is approximately 25,000 new visitors visiting us over the next couple of years. So having that visitor center and the Truman Library, Clinton's on the Square, the Historic Square, the National Frontier Trails Museum, which I'm going to get to next, I mean, that really would be tremendous. And travel experts are telling us that domestic travel is on the rise. People obviously have been cooped up for 15 or 16 months. They want to get out of their house. They want to take their kids somewhere exciting. So I think Independence is very uniquely positioned for that. And we just wanted to make sure that everybody involved is on the same page. And Congressman Cleaver and Senator Blunt again reaffirmed their commitment to this project at this location, and we'll be monitoring developments closely. Again, kind of still in the early stages, but we're hoping that it kind of gets moving along now that hopefully we're in a different place. And then the last item we discussed briefly was a Congressional Delegate recognition for the National Frontier Trails Museum. These types of designations are not unique to our area. The World War I Museum at Liberty Memorial was given one. The Negro League Baseball Museum was given one. And the reason why we think that's important is because the National Frontier Trails Museum is the only museum in the nation devoted to telling the story of the Santa Fe, Oregon, and California trails, has the largest public research library devoted to the Western Trails there, the headquarters of the Oregon California Trails Association. So we feel like a national designation, number one, is very appropriate and suited for this facility, and secondly, tied in with all the other things going on in Independence Square and with our tourism efforts, that we think that this would be another selling point to get people to come to Independence, to stay here, to enjoy our history, and to have a memorable event for their family. I have one last, the weather was wonderful when we were in Washington, D.C. It was 105 degrees here. When we visited Capitol Hill, all the staffers would ask Mayor Weir, what are you here for? And Mayor Weir said, you're not going to believe this, but we're here to beat the heat from Independence, Missouri. Because it was 105 here and it was 80 degrees there. But we feel like we had very productive meetings with Congressman Cleaver, Senator Blunt, and Congressman Graves. I know the mayor also was able to meet with some members of the Kansas delegation and her role on the board of directors with Mark, and kind of shared some of our transportation issues as well. So we feel like it was very helpful. And I just wanted to give you that brief summary, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, questions?
I don't have a question, but I'm in, man. That sounds awesome. That'd be really cool to get that designation for the National Trails Museum.
Well, I mentioned in Congressman Cleaver, the best thing about it, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And now I'm just completely, I'm going to have to go around behind your backs and try to figure out what the Truman Visitor Center deal is. That's very exciting too. So thank you very much.
Oh, you mean the storage?
Yeah.
Yeah, the National Park Service has that in a storage facility, and the greater Kansas City region is all I'm allowed to say, but,
It was incredible. Yeah, I had no idea. And just the story about how some things ended up at the library and how some things stayed in the home, which they received in 1983 after Bess Truman died in 1982. I've said this several times, not only are what they have incredible and the amount of things they had, I kind of was under the impression they just had a few little leftover odds and ends of stuff that didn't ever get to the library or stay in the home, and it is a vast collection of personal items, dating all the way back to the Victorian age of Bess Wallace's grandparents, some of their possessions, so it's really quite fascinating. But I think the thing that struck me the most, and I said this to Morris, and Mark Randall was green with envy because he didn't get to go. It really shows the power of the presidency, that when you are the President of the United States and the First Lady of the United States, everything you possess has meaning. Things don't just get thrown away or given away. There's meaning attached to all the things that we all take for granted. And when you cleaned out your grandparents' house, or you cleaned out your parents' house, and all the stuff that you threw in the dumpster or gave to Goodwill was kept. And it's really fascinating to sort of understand the significance of, this family that we all love here in Independence, the Trumans, the just sheer power of the presidency. It was fascinating. Anything else? Speaking of Truman, finally, the Truman Library will be opening for tours to the public on July the 2nd. Because of the ongoing pandemic, they are limited time tickets, but they are available for sale beginning today. So if they will start making those available for limited capacity. Many of us have had the opportunity. I know last week our staff had the chance to go on a tour of the library. It is truly remarkable. Some of the council members have had that opportunity as well. So I know everybody will want a chance to go over and see it. There will be an unveiling of the Truman statue, which has been placed outside the new entrance. That's on Thursday, I believe, in the morning. It's Navy Week, so we'll have some representatives from the United States Navy on hand in conjunction with that celebration. So that's all very, very exciting. As I said, I think they're limiting the occupancy in groups to about 30 people at a time going through there because of several things, all related to COVID. The federal staff is not able to be back, and they still are under a mandate from the federal government to maintain some social distancing. We do have COVID variants here in the city of Independence. We know that. That has been confirmed by reports that we get from the Little Blue Valley Sewer District that does testing out at the sewer treatment plant, that these variants are here. We are continuing to offer vaccination clinics on a regular basis. Those are posted on social media. They're posted on our city website. If you want to know more about it, contact me or your council members, and we will let you know when those are available. We're looking for partners in the community. If you want to host a vaccination clinic, please let us know, and we will try to make arrangements so that we can make those as accessible to our community as possible as we continue to enter into the holiday season with 4th of July, and people are certainly traveling. We know that, getting out of town, going on vacation. then coming home, and soon children hopefully will be going back to school. So please, if you are so inclined, take advantage of these free vaccination clinics that we are making available. Mr. City Manager, anything else this evening?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Okay, we are adjourned.